Banks in India help in the economic development of the country. They perform various functions like accepting deposit from the people, giving them enough return by properly investing their money. They also give loan assistance for people who are in need of money, maybe to the industrial groups, maybe to the farmers. Right. Along with that, they also render various other services like acting on behalf of the customer and making payments. They also act as an agent to the customer in many cases. They offer guarantee to many of the customer transactions. Likewise, they are into a variety of services which will help the people to perform their various commercial and business transactions effectively. So today we are looking into the definition of banking. Uh, as you can see, Banking Regulation Act 1949 has defined banking as accepting for the purpose of lending or investment of deposits of money from the public, repayable on demand or otherwise, and withdrawal by check, draft, order, or any other or through any other means. So I have highlighted the key points which you have to remember. Accepting deposits from public, and basic idea behind that is it's for the purpose of lending, that is giving loans, or maybe for investment, so as to ensure proper return to the people who have deposited money with the banker. And another nature of these deposits are these are withdrawable on demand. On any day, if it is a large amount, maybe the customer has to intimate the banker that I'm going to withdraw this amount so and so date, please arrange the funds for me. If it is in savings bank account, if it is in a short term, then definitely if in all cases, banker will have to repay the money as and when the customer demands for it. And payment can be made through account if it is bigger amount, maybe more than 10,000. Bank normally does that by transferring that to the account transaction. It can be withdrawn by check, draft, demand draft, or now we are very much familiar with the e-transactions, e-transfers, electronic transfers, online payments, right? Online deposit transfers. So that also is possible. So to summarize, banks accept money from public, utilize it properly for the benefit of the customer as well as for the benefit of the community. Because when these deposits being taken from the customers are properly used, are cautiously lent to eligible customers, ultimately that will help in the development of the economy as a whole. That's where we start with our discussion. Right. The second part which we are going to discuss is about the functions of banks. Maybe before discussing the functions, we should know how are banks classified. So that's why we begin with classification of banks. Now, classification of banks can be broadly classified on the basis of functions, on the basis of ownership, on the basis of domicile, and also on the basis of registration. In our class, today we will be discussing about the first part, classification of banks based on functions. Now, before discussing, please remember that these classifications are not in watertight containers. For example, if I'm trying to classify students in our class, I can classify you on the basis of your gender, on the basis of your marks, or maybe on the basis of your hobbies, right? It will all depend upon what is the purpose for me to classify that. Likewise, when I'm classifying banks, here this is a comprehensive format where I'm trying to classify first based on the functions, means depending on the type of activities they do for the clients, for the prospective clients or for the customers, right? So first let us take about commercial banks. We all are very familiar with commercial banks because they are those are the categories of banks who are actually meeting the day-to-day requirements of individual clients, individual customers, right? So primarily, because commercial banks aim at accepting deposits, lending money, and maybe they also do different services acting on behalf of the customers. So if you ask me, they do this as a service? No. They do this for earning profit. It is that share of profit which they share with the customers who had deposited money with them in the form of interest. So there should be a match between interest paid and interest received by the banks. Interest paid is for the deposits they have collected. Interest received is for the borrowings made by the banks to the various customers. There should be a match between that. Is if interest paid is more than the interest received by the bank, automatically the bank will enter into a loss. So we all know that a loss-making organization cannot be beneficial for the economy. It can only be a burden. So commercial banks aim to maximize the profit by serving the customers in the best possible way. See, if I say an example, State Bank of India, Union Bank, all these will qualify as a commercial bank. Federal Bank, if I look into another category like private banks, Federal Bank, all these will qualify as a commercial bank. Now, the second part which we are going to discuss in our today's class is industrial banks. See, industrial banks are mainly aiming at the development of industrial sector. They are specifically designated for meeting the needs of the industry. Now, you might want me to ask what is so different about the needs of industry. The needs of industry means basically long-term needs for fund. Industry would require capital for meeting their setup cost, maybe for establishment cost, maybe for cost of renovation, cost of expansion. So it is not the kind of financial assistance that is required by an individual customers. So industrial banks like Industrial Development Bank of India had been set up primarily for meeting the demands that come from industrial sector within the country. We have also have many state development, small finance development bank of India, where we also have Industrial Credit and Investment Bank of India. So, and investment corporate, Industrial Credit and Investment Corporation of India. All these come under the category of industrial banks who are looking into the needs of customers, maybe business group who would like to set up business, do business and establish in a country. So they are performing a major role in supporting the capital formation in our economy. And now the third one which we are going to discuss in our today's class is about agricultural banks. Almost all the banks give loan or financial assistance to the agriculture sector of the country, because as we know, if India has to have a holistic development, the country's agriculture sector also should develop. So that's why it is part of the function being rendered by almost all banks in India, that is, which come under the commercial category. But specifically, when we look into NABARD, National Bank for Agriculture and Rural Development, act as the apex institution monitoring the kind of financial assistance, the kind of requirements, the kind of financial products which are needed for the agrarian economy of the country. They will direct the banks to know to how to cater to the needs of these agriculture sector of the country. So that function is brought under the category of cultural bank. See, almost all the bank would be lending towards priority sector lending, will be giving financial assistance under the category of priority sector lending. Agriculture is one in that category. Agriculture sector of the country falls into that area as of now. Then the last part which we will be discussing in our today's class is about exchange banks or foreign exchange banks. In fact, you might ask me, do we have separate banks like that? Uh, Generally, what we see is foreign exchange functions are performed by almost all the commercial banks. They have a major main commercial banks where they have a separate wing, separate department that takes care of the foreign exchange transactions. Now, what is foreign exchange? It's nothing but exchange of one currency for another currency that would be required at the time of trade, that would be required at the time of travel or any sort of business. Say, suppose if I'm traveling to a place in UK, I might need pound or euro for, or maybe dollar to carry with me for conducting my transactions when I'm in UK. So in that case, I need to convert Indian rupee into pound or dollar or, as you say, euro. So that's a foreign exchange transaction. I can approach bank which is having a foreign exchange department and place a request for currency conversion. Bank will tell me, okay, this is the exchange rate prevailing now. If I'm willing to, they will do it for me. Right? Of course, if it is a large volume transaction, there are certain restrictions that's been imposed by Reserve Bank of India. We're not going detail to that now. But the main function performed by foreign exchange banks are primarily the current exchange of one currency for another, conversion of one currency into another. All right. So we had been discussing till now about definition of banking. Primarily, it covers the kind of operations being rendered by banks in India. We also discussed about classification of banks. In that, we said banks can be primarily classified on the basis of functions, ownership, domicile, and registration. Then we started discussing about what are commercial banks. Commercial banks are those which are very near to the customers, the ordinary individuals of the country. They try to satisfy the requirements in the form of offering different deposit products and different loan products, as well as rendering various agency and secondary functions, which we will discuss in detail at a later stage. Now, industrial banks, they are specifically set up for meeting the requirement, the demand coming up from the industrial sector of the country. I've said about IDBI, the example of IDBI, ICICI, then Small Industry Development Bank of India, uh, then there are no the aspect here which you have to remember is the kind of loan assistance or financial assistance given by the banks would be long term in nature, because we know that the need of the industrial sector, the capital requirement of the industrial sector normally would be for a longer period, ranging from 3 to 15 years. So commercial banks aiming at meeting the demands of customers by accepting deposits, maybe short term or medium term and long term, cannot, or it is pretty difficult for them to cater to the very long term requirements of industrial sector of India. That's why we have a separate bank category which are looking into these functions. Then we discussed about agricultural functions and agriculture banks. They are primarily looking into the needs of the agriculture sector, which if you closely examine, there can be a seasonal nature for the kind of assistance required by the agriculture sector of the economy. They require loan at the time of beginning of their farming, maybe at the beginning of the operating cycle, which can be repaid only after the harvesting is over. There should be specific products, customized products, which are aiming at satisfying the requirement coming up from agriculture sector. Okay, the last part which we discussed in our today's class, was about exchange banks, otherwise called as foreign exchange banks. Foreign exchange banks, or the function, the so-called function exchanges, conversion of currency from one currency, conversion of currency, that is from one type, one nation's currency to another. Maybe conversion of rupee, Indian rupee to dollar, or yen to rupee. It depends on the need of the customer. So those wing, the department of banks which perform that function, would be called as exchange banks, right? So these are the things which we discussed in our today's class.